Good morning, everyone. This is John with Gun.Deals, and I wish I had better news, but it does appear to be true that Glock has gone ahead and discontinued just about every model currently in production outside of a few slimline variants. This news comes courtesy of Glock Store and others who have been reporting on the various cancellations, reasoning, and some of the new replacement models. Huge news! As of November 30th, all Glocks are discontinued except the 43, 43X, and 48X. All Glocks will be replaced with new Glock V models. These will have changes that prevent switch conversions at launch. All will be non-MOS, no pricing changes, still working to confirm new information. Now, if you're not familiar with the way that Glocks work, they are, of course, striker fired utilizing backplates, cruciform style triggers, which means that fortunately or unfortunately, depending on your frame of mind, that these are very easy to convert from semi-auto to not that with various aftermarket devices. Now, that has been getting Glock in a lot of hot water in multiple states, specifically California. They've been completely banned outright because of the design of the trigger and safety mechanisms, because they are quote unquote easily convertible. And it is possible that some of these rulings in certain states and areas that limit Glock's potential sales has preempted them to go ahead and change the design in its entirety. If I were a betting man, this doesn't seem like the most calculated move, like this was planned for years and decades to replace all Gen 5 Glocks with these new Gen V models, which obviously is very similar in terms of its naming structure. This seems to me to be a very reactionary measure to preempt some future litigation at the cost of course, short-term sales, because they are quite literally discontinuing all or the vast majority of their current offerings, which still have contracts in the US for various police departments and whatnot. So it seems to me that this will undoubtedly hurt their current bottom line and probably doesn't look too promising for their future because this is such a strange out of left field move. Glock Store did follow up with an additional update saying we've been able to confirm through a leaked image that a new Glock 19C model will be released under the new Glock V line. It appears the C models, which if you're not familiar with Glocks, those are the comped versions, even though those are technically ported, much like what you see here on my Glock 17. So ported Glocks being back on the market, kind of cool, though we'll have to see if that meshes out with having non-MOS options, which, as you know, is kind of the reason why we buy a lot of pistols nowadays, is most people are putting optics on top of them. Now, Ben Stager managed to get this email from Lipsy's, which is another huge distributor for Glocks, saying that on November 30th, so just a little bit over a month from now, Glock will stop all shipments on all Gen 3, Gen 5, and Gen 5 MOS platforms. Now, that means that the 43, 43X, XMOS, 48, 48 MOS, respectively, those will continue shipping as Gen 5 products. Everything else is going to be updated and retooled into the new Gen V products. So in December 2025, so hopefully there's not too much of an interruption in sales, that we will begin shipping Gen V series. Pricing will be consistent with current Gen 5 structure, meaning that there's no price increase, which is at least nice. You will get the 17V, 19V, 23, 23V MOS. So there are some MOS models coming, but only in the calibers you don't want. So 23 MOS, 20 MOS, 21 MOS. However, your 17, 19, 45, 19X, 26 for some of you out there, and 44 will not be coming in an MOS variant, meaning that you will have to send your pistol off to have it milled or have some sort of aftermarket slide. Now, the changes to the V series include internal slide and trigger improvements, meaning that these will not be easy to convert utilizing certain aftermarket devices to be no longer semi-automatic. Current Glock performance triggers will not function in V series guns. All current models retain MTP, MAP through end of year and will be on sale. Now, what this means, which is kind of complicated, so your Gen 3, 4, and 5 Glocks, which have wide parts interchangeability, which have a vast amount of aftermarket parts as well, well, all of that might be out the window if they're changing the way that the triggers, the way that the slides interact, All of that wonderful parts compatibility, well, all of that may be a thing of the past depending on how the changes are implemented. Now, that means for every Glock aftermarket company, whether that's Timney, Apex, some of these other trigger manufacturers, well, all of their sales essentially just went to zero, as we only have another month of Gen 3 and 5 sales, and after that, they will no longer be available. If you're planning on picking up a 3 or a 5 of any variety, I would recommend doing that now before the prices and availability skyrocket and disappear, respectively. Now, that being said, if you already own the Gen 3, Gen 5 Glocks that you like, I would expect that aftermarket support will stick around for quite some time, as there are still millions of these pistols in circulation. So while there won't be any new ones, I imagine you'll still be able to get all the parts to your heart's content, at least for a considerable block of time. However, new products being made for them, well, that time and energy is probably going to be going towards pistols that are currently being made, not legacy models, as the Gen 5 is now a legacy option. Now, also of note, don't be confused, this is not a Glock Gen 6. I think the Gen V is simply a updated Gen 5 to get around restrictions in certain states and locales, and again, to limit possible future litigation. So the Gen 6 models that we've seen with the dual component, the two-piece frames, I think those are still coming at some indeterminate point of time. So the Gen 5 and Gen V may be completely irrelevant in a relatively short period of time. Now, as a Gen 3 Chad who's never owned a Gen 5 and probably won't own a Gen V unless there's some really interesting reason to pick one up, this doesn't affect me personally all that much. Something else to consider is that this might start to affect some of the other Gen 3 cloners out there. Think Ruger RXM, PSA Dagger, or similar. If Glock is currently the subject of this litigation for being easily convertible and whatnot, well, then now that they're out of the picture, that litigation may transfer on to people like Shadow Systems, PSA's Dagger, Lone Wolf Ltd, whatever it might be. Your Gen 3 Glock clones may also be short lived once the biggest fish is out of that pond. Well, litigators do be litigating, and so they might simply hop on to whoever is next available. So, with all that out of the way, gents, let me know which of the new Gen V models you are most excited for or most upset about not being carried over, and the ones that, of course, were discontinued. Hopefully, we do get some C models at least, as well as a slight bonus, maybe some ones with better grip texture and some other updates, but only time will tell. I do expect to see early reviewers have these in the next month or so we can kind of see what the changes are going to be. But once again, that is all the info that we have at time of recording. So with all that out of the way, gentlemen, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I will see you in the next one. Peace off.